I have lived with this secret for so many years that sometimes I forget it is still a secret. My children have grown up believing a simple story, a clean story, a story that makes sense. Their father left. Their parents couldn't stay together. Things didn't work out. That is what they know. That is what I allowed them to know. I never corrected them. I never added details. I never defended myself, not because I didn't care, but because telling the truth would have hurt them more than believing a lie. I remember the day I left the house. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no neighbors watching, just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. My children were still asleep. Their backpacks were lined up near the door, ready for school. Their shoes were messy, like always. So I stood there for a long time, looking at those small things, trying to memorize them. Because some part of me knew that once I walked out, nothing would ever feel the same again. People think leaving is an act of selfishness, an act of escape, an act of weakness. But sometimes leaving is the only way to stop something worse from happening. I didn't leave because I stopped loving my children. That love never disappeared. It still hasn't. I left because I was afraid of the person I was slowly becoming inside that house. No one saw it. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even my children. But every night, after everyone went to sleep, I would sit alone in the dark and feel something breaking inside me. Their mother and I didn't fight loudly. We didn't insult each other. We didn't betray each other in obvious ways. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Inside, we were two strangers pretending to understand each other. Every conversation felt like walking on glass. Every silence felt like punishment. I started holding my breath without realizing it. At dinner, in the living room, even in my own bedroom. I learned how to disappear while still being physically present. My children never noticed. They were too young. And honestly, that was my goal. I wanted them to remember a calm home, not a broken one. What they don't know is how many nights I cried alone in the bathroom, trying not to make a sound. How many times I stared at my reflection and asked myself, how did I get here? There was a moment, a very small moment, that changed everything. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a discovery. It was a look. A look from their mother that told me I no longer belonged there. No anger, no sadness, just distance. That look stayed with me. It followed me to work. It followed me back home. It followed me into my sleep. I started realizing that staying was slowly teaching my children the wrong lesson. They were learning that love means silence, that marriage means endurance, that unhappiness is something you simply accept. I couldn't let that be their example, so I made a decision that would make me look like the villain. I chose to leave quietly. I chose to carry the blame. I chose to let them believe that their father walked away. Because if someone had to be hurt, I wanted it to be me. The morning I left, I kissed their foreheads without waking them up. I whispered, "I'm sorry," to children who would never hear it. Xiao, and then I walked out with nothing but a bag and a truth I knew I would never share. Even now, years later, when they ask gentle questions, I still stay quiet. Not because the truth doesn't matter, but because sometimes protecting the people you love means letting them misunderstand you forever. After I left, the world didn't collapse. That surprised me the most. The sun still rose. People still went to work. Cars still filled the streets. Life continued, perfectly organized, without my presence. That was the first lesson. Leaving doesn't create an explosion. It creates a quiet absence. I moved into a small place. Too clean, too silent. Nothing there knew my name. The first night, I sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet. I listened to the sound of my own breathing. It felt unfamiliar, as if I had been holding my breath for years and had only just started breathing again. Freedom is supposed to feel light, but at first it felt heavy. There was no one to explain myself to, no one to disappoint, no one to negotiate with, and somehow that scared me. During the day, I acted normal. I went to work, I spoke to people, I smiled when appropriate. But every evening, when I returned to that empty space, the silence waited for me. Silence is honest. It doesn't distract you. It doesn't argue. It doesn't comfort. It simply reflects who you are when no one is watching. I realized something uncomfortable. I had built my entire identity around being needed. A husband, a father, a provider, a stabilizing force. And now, I was none of those things in practice. I could still love my children, but I wasn't part of their daily life anymore. I wasn't the one reminding them to do homework. I wasn't the one listening to their stories at dinner. I wasn't the one fixing small problems before they became big ones. I existed on the edges. Phone calls replaced presence. Short visits replaced routines. Updates replaced intimacy. And I let it happen. Because I had chosen this path. There were nights I almost drove back. Not because I wanted to return, but because loneliness has a way of rewriting your memories. It makes you forget why you left. It highlights the good moments and blurs the pain. I would sit in my car, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about knocking on the door. And then I would remember the look, that quiet distance, that slow erosion of myself. And I stayed where I was. People asked questions. They always do. Are you happier now? Do you regret it? Was it worth it? I learned how to answer without answering. I said things like, it's complicated, or I'm doing my best. The truth was harder. I wasn't happier, but I wasn't disappearing anymore. There is a difference. Happiness is loud. Relief is quiet. What no one tells you is that choosing yourself often means choosing to be misunderstood. My children started asking questions as they grew older. Not directly, never aggressively, just small comments, careful words. Why don't you live with us? Why did you and Mom separate? Was it something we did? Those questions hurt more than accusations, because I could see them trying to protect me, even as children. I gave them the simplest answers possible. I made sure they never felt responsible. And I swallowed the rest. Every parent carries guilt. But guilt feels different when you leave. It follows you everywhere. It sits next to you at night. It speaks in your own voice. There were moments of peace. I won't deny that. Moments where I felt lighter. Moments where I rediscovered parts of myself I had buried for years. I read again. I walked without direction. I sat in cafes watching strangers live their lives. I learned who I was without roles attached, and that process was both freeing and terrifying. Because when no one needs you, you are forced to decide who you want to be anyway. Some days, that choice felt empowering. Other days, it felt pointless. I missed being essential. I missed being part of something larger than myself. I didn't miss the tension. I didn't miss the silence filled with resentment, I didn't miss the slow erosion of my identity, but I missed belonging. Leaving didn't solve everything. It didn't fix me. It didn't turn life into something clean and simple. It just stopped the bleeding. And sometimes, that is all you can hope for. As the years passed, I learned how to live in between regret and acceptance, between love and distance, between freedom and loss. I became good at being alone, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And still, there were things I never said, things I never explained, because once you choose silence, it becomes a habit. And some truths, once buried long enough, start to feel impossible to dig up again. Time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it only makes things clearer. My children grew up. Not suddenly, not dramatically. But enough that I could no longer pretend they were unaware. Their voices changed. Their questions became more careful. Their silences became longer. They stopped asking simple things. They started watching. And when children start watching, it means they already feel something is missing. The first real conversation happened on an ordinary afternoon. No warning, no preparation. We were sitting across from each other, coffee between us, neutral territory. One of them looked at me and asked, very calmly, "Did you ever regret leaving?" There was no anger in the question, no accusation, just curiosity. That hurt more than any confrontation could have, because anger means pain is still loud. Curiosity means pain has learned to live quietly. I took a long breath, not to calm myself, but to buy time. I said, "Regret is a complicated word." That was true, but it was also incomplete. What I didn't say was how regret visits you at night, uninvited, and sits beside you like an old friend who knows all your secrets. I wanted to tell them everything, every reason, every fear, every moment that led to my decision, but I saw their faces. Older now, stronger, still fragile in ways they didn't know. And I realized something. The truth doesn't just belong to the person telling it. It belongs to the person receiving it too. Once you give it to them, you can never take it back. So I gave them pieces, only the pieces I believed they could carry. I told them I left because I wasn't healthy inside that house. I told them staying would have made me someone I didn't want them to learn from. They nodded. They listened. They accepted. But acceptance doesn't mean understanding. There were things they didn't ask. And I was grateful. There were things they didn't want to hear. And I respected that. What they never said, but what I felt, was this quiet question hanging in the air. Why wasn't loving us enough to make you stay? That question has no gentle answer. Because the truth is, love is not always the strongest force in a family. Sometimes survival is. As they grew older, the distance between us changed shape. It didn't disappear, it matured. We learned how to talk politely. We learned how to avoid sensitive topics. We learned how to exist without reopening old wounds. That is a kind of peace, but it is not intimacy. I watched them become adults. From the outside, I saw them make choices, fall in love, make mistakes, recover. I wanted to guide them. But guidance feels different when you are no longer at the center of their lives. Advice becomes optional. Presence becomes symbolic. There were moments I felt proud, moments I felt unnecessary, moments I felt invisible, and all of those feelings existed at the same time. One evening, after a long conversation, one of them said something simple. "I think you did what you thought was right." That sentence stayed with me. not because it forgave me, but because it acknowledged the complexity. It told me they no longer saw the world in black and white. Neither did I. Still, there were nights I wondered what kind of relationship we would have if I had stayed. Would we be closer? Or would we have resented each other? That question has no answer. And unanswered questions are dangerous companions. As parents, so we imagine our children remembering us clearly, as heroes, as villains, as something defined. But the truth is, we become blurred figures in their memories. And maybe that is mercy. I noticed something else as time passed. They stopped needing explanations. They stopped needing reassurance. They started living their own lives fully. And while that is what every parent wants, it also confirms something quietly painful. You are no longer the center of their story. You become a chapter, an influence, a reference point, important, but no longer essential. I learned to sit with that reality, not comfortably, but honestly. There are things I still hide, not because they would destroy them, but because they would destroy the version of me they have learned to accept. And that version is enough. I don't know if one day I will tell them everything. I don't know if the full truth would bring clarity or just reopen scars that have learned to close. What I do know is that love doesn't end when you leave. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, more restrained, more careful. And sometimes, the hardest part of being a parent is knowing that your silence might be the final gift you give. Aging is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, through small changes you pretend not to notice. You forget names. You repeat stories. You wake up tired without remembering why. One day, you realize your world has become smaller. Not emotionally, physically. Rooms replace cities. Hallways replace streets. Schedules replace freedom. I never imagined myself here, sitting among people who all carry invisible histories. Once, we were all someone. Now, we are mostly memories. People ask about my past sometimes, not out of curiosity, out of politeness. What did you do before? Were you married? Do you have children? I answer carefully. Not because the truth is painful, but because the truth is long, and long truths make people uncomfortable. I watch others talk about their youth, their victories, their regrets. Some speak proudly, some bitterly. Some avoid the topic completely. I listen more than I speak, because when you reach this age, you finally understand something simple. No one escapes their choices. They only learn how to live beside them. At night, memories become louder, not the important ones, the small ones. The sound of a door closing, a look that lasted too long, a sentence that could have been said differently. So those moments return without mercy. I think about the man I was when I believed time was unlimited. I thought consequences would wait. I thought explanations could come later. I thought love would remain unchanged. That was my greatest misunderstanding. Love ages too. It doesn't disappear. It stiffens. It becomes fragile. I look at old photos sometimes. Not often, but enough. I see a man who looks confident, certain, decisive. I don't recognize him completely. I want to tell him to slow down, to listen longer, to fear less. But advice never travels backward. People assume regret looks like tears, like despair, like constant pain. It doesn't. Regret is quieter. It's sitting in a room full of people and realizing you are the only one who remembers a different version of yourself. It's knowing that the story you tell others is a simplified version, because the full version would take too much explaining. I think about my children often, not with guilt, with distance. They have lives now that do not require my approval. That is both comforting and devastating. I wonder if they think about me when they make difficult decisions. If my absence taught them caution or courage, I will never know. One of the hardest lessons of aging is accepting that understanding is no longer guaranteed. You don't get to clarify. You don't get to reframe. Your story becomes what others remember, not what you intended. And maybe that is fair. I have noticed something else. People here talk less about what they did wrong and more about what they wish they had explained, not to strangers, to family, not to fix things, and just to be seen clearly one last time. I feel that desire too, but I also feel something else. Peace. Not the kind that comes from resolution, the kind that comes from exhaustion. When you have replayed the past enough times, it loses its power to surprise you. It becomes familiar, predictable, like an old song you no longer hate, but no longer love. I don't regret leaving. I regret believing silence was neutral. Silence is not empty. It carries weight. And sometimes it carries the wrong meaning. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't tell him to stay or leave. I would tell him to explain, to speak imperfectly, to risk being misunderstood. Because clarity, even painful clarity, is kinder than mystery. As the days pass, I feel less need to justify myself. Not because I was right, but because justification no longer changes anything. What remains is acceptance, not approval, acceptance of my choices, of their consequences, of the fact that love does not guarantee closeness. I sit with others now, sharing meals, sharing silence. We rarely talk about the past in detail, but we all feel it, hanging between us, heavy, unspoken. And in those quiet moments, I understand something clearly. Life does not ask if you are ready for its final chapters. It simply turns the page. And all you can do is read what you wrote. There is a moment in life when you stop asking what could have been, not because you found peace, but because the question no longer has energy. I think I reached that moment recently. It happened quietly, like most important things. I was sitting by the window, watching people walk past with places to go and reasons to hurry. And for the first time, I didn't feel jealous. I felt finished, not finished with life, finished with resistance. I finally understood something I spent decades avoiding. Leaving was not the real mistake. Believing that time would explain things for me was. I assumed distance would soften the truth. That silence would feel less cruel than honesty. I was wrong. Silence does not heal. It delays. And delayed pain doesn't disappear. It grows roots. I see it now in the way my children speak to me. Polite, careful, distant. There is no anger in their voices. And that hurts more than anger ever could. Anger means something still wants an answer. Calm means the question died. I replay the moment I left their mother. Not the argument, not the decision, the pause. The moment I chose not to explain everything. I told myself, they're too young. They'll understand later. There will be time. Time heard that and quietly walked away. I realize now that children don't need perfect parents. They need visible ones. Parents who speak, even when their words are messy. Parents who explain, even when explanations make them look weak. I didn't give them that. I gave them absence, wrapped in good intentions. People think regret comes from bad choices. Sometimes it comes from incomplete ones, choices made halfway, truths told partially, love expressed indirectly. I lived a life of almosts, almost honest, almost present, almost brave, and almost is a cruel place to exist. As I age, I feel my story settling, not into truth, into version, the version my children carry, the version strangers hear, the version that will survive me. I no longer try to correct it. Correction requires time, and I am learning to respect what I no longer have. What remains is reflection. I see now that love is not measured by sacrifice alone. It is measured by clarity. Love without explanation feels like abandonment, even when abandonment was never intended. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had stayed one more night, spoken one more hour, explained one more layer. But wondering is indulgent, and I am done indulging. What I accept now is responsibility, not legal, not social, emotional. I accept that my silence taught my children something, not about love, about uncertainty. And uncertainty is a heavy inheritance. If there is one thing I want people listening to understand, it is this. Shall leaving does not define you, silence does. Life does not punish mistakes, it echoes them, and the echo lasts longer than the moment that created it. I don't seek forgiveness anymore. Forgiveness belongs to the living relationships. I seek understanding, even if it comes too late to matter. Some nights, I imagine sitting across from my children, older now, tired like me, and I imagine saying everything I never said, not to be forgiven, but to be accurate, to be seen correctly, even if briefly. That image comforts me, not because it will happen, but because it shows me what I truly wanted all along. Not escape, not freedom, to be understood. If you are listening to this and you are still in the middle of your story, please remember this. You don't have to be right. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to protect everyone from uncomfortable truth. Speak, explain, say the thing that scares you to say, because the pain of honesty fades faster than the pain of being remembered incorrectly. And if this story stayed with you, if it felt uncomfortably familiar, then maybe you already know what needs to be said in your life. If so, don't wait for time to do the explaining for you. It won't. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but because stories like this are easier to face when we don't face them alone.